about those in my life I am honored to call friend, Sam Moore is high on that list. This is a man that for many years now I can call just to ask a question, request a favor, or get some good advice. And I know that each and every time I will get an immediate positive response from Sam. A response that you know comes from the heart. I am not only proud to call Sam Moore my friend, but I truly admire him for his honesty, his leadership, and the example he sets as a husband, father, and grandfather. We all know without a doubt that Sam loves this country. His desire to serve his country and fellow man has inspired me to take up ever more earnestly the banner of patriotism and loyalty to the ideals that our great country was founded on. So thank you, Sam, for all you do to help us realize that the ideals our founders lost their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honors for are ideals that are still worth fighting for. I give you Sam Moore.
Thank you very much. Good to be here again with everyone. Ricardo, thank you.
Thank you.
For standing up, and that's exactly what has to happen. And when things work properly, those kinds of things don't happen in the first place. But when they do, those who are in positions of authority should respond appropriately. But it does take all of the diligence on the part of all of us as citizens if we're going to keep what we have, which leads me right directly to what we're going to talk about tonight. I hope that as I go through some of these things here this evening, some of this will be new. It's not possible that you speak to a group like this who are far more informed than the average. So you're not going to hear something, everything's not going to be new, but hopefully it'll be in a way that perhaps fit things together in a little bit of a different fashion, perhaps. The theme of what I want to talk about tonight is, we've entitled it, A Republic If You Can Keep It. We've all heard that phrase, but immediately following the adoption of the Constitution in Philadelphia, Ben Franklin walked out into the square and, as we all know, was approached, and he answered a simple question. What did you do? He said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. I think if Franklin were to walk onto the square in Philadelphia today, with the knowledge of all that's happening, this kind of thing plus more, I wonder if he wouldn't say, what in the world have you done? We gave you a republic and you've nearly lost it. I think never in the history of our country have we witnessed such an astounding return to the nightmare of tyrannies that our founders absolutely so opposed. And never have I seen such a rejection of the elements of Penn's holy experiment of self-government under God, or a repudiation of the principles that once produced the shining city on a hill. The events of just the last several months, and you can go back in the several years, this last several months though in Washington, prior to the raising the debt ceiling and all that happened with that, to now the continuing Obamacare saga, seems to be awakening, although slowly, even the very sleepy, as to how the incredible confusion, blindness, and fear that reflects our current culture and national leadership has again not solved a single problem, but only magnified and postponed the problem just a couple of months, pushing it off into the future, guaranteeing a worse crisis than before. So for the next several minutes, I'd like to share a few foundational thoughts about the republic that we were given, what's destroying it, and what we can do to keep it. A republic, by definition, is a state in which the exercise of the sovereign power resides in representatives elected by the people. It's not a democracy. It stands in sharp contrast to an oligarchy, which is the rule of a few, or an aristocracy, the rule of an elite, or certainly a monarchy or a dictatorship, which is the rule of one. And as far as types of governments go, republics are rare, and they don't last that long, because the tendency of power is to consolidate itself once again into oligarchy, or aristocracy, or a dictatorship, and the tendency of the people is not to do the work necessary to keep the republic, as Franklin talked about. But our republic is even rarer because it was intentionally built on the biblical model as given by God. William Penn, who was viewed by both Franklin and Jefferson as the father of the founders, did more to lay down the foundation for our republic than perhaps anyone. And he made clear that the ultimate and the freest form of government was a republic that rested on the concept of self-government, where people didn't need a king or someone else to tell them their every move. But he also made it clear that self-government couldn't exist if people didn't govern themselves according to the scripture, the Ten Commandments, as he said, where God, as Penn said, was the ultimate king. That's why we generally refer to this nation as one that's built on the Judeo-Christian mindset or principles. There are two, as I've tried to examine and put it into simple terms, it seems to me that there are two transcendent pillars of truth upon which our nation was built, embraced by our founders, and upon which our republic was given. And it's these two pillars of truth that have been undermined, weakening the very foundations of our republic. The first pillar of truth is a clearly understood biblical worldview of life, of nations, of governments, of people, and of freedom. Now, what is a biblical worldview? As espoused by our founders, a biblical worldview is simply this: that there is God and He is truth. Second, there was a creation, an act of God. Thirdly, there was a fall where sin entered the world, precipitated by a real devil. And then lastly, that there is redemption secured by Jesus Christ. That is a biblical worldview. And if one looks at life through that view, it changes everything. The second pillar of truth is the understanding of law, which arises from this biblical worldview. And that's a view that God is above all law, that He created governments or authority, and that all authority comes from Him. This is the view that there is no power but of God, and that all who serve in any position of authority within civil government are in positions of delegated authority under Him. That's what we really call the rule of law. In the Latin, this is referred to as lex rex, or law over the king, or king under the law. Dictatorships and tyranny is rex lex, or king above the law. And upon these two pillars rest the principles of life and liberty, private property, and these others inalienable rights that come from God that are declared in our Declaration of Independence. And upon these two pillars rests the concept that tyranny, or rex lex, or king above the law, is to be resisted as a usurpation of God's law. And it's upon these two pillars that the Constitution is built. These two pillars support the concept that the tendency of humankind is to reject God's pattern, usurp His position, and to place man above God's law. Hence the phrase, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, as Penn said, the restraint of the Ten Commandments must be placed on individual ambition in order to preserve self-government. And so must restraint be placed upon civil government to prevent it from consolidating power and corrupting itself absolutely. Since government by definition is authority or law, restraints have to be placed in two places. First, upon the form of government itself, and secondly, upon the people who occupy the positions within that government. The restraint on government itself is in the form of a representative republic with the Constitution as our highest civil law, or shall I say, our civil king. Our Constitution, or civil king, delegates and divides power into three branches, giving the greater power to the legislative branch, next to the executive, and finally to the judicial. The restraint of every person who occupies the positions within government takes his or her oath or commitment in the form of a constitutional oath. The oath was designed as the highest commitment of every person in government and arises from the biblical worldview, acknowledging that governmental authority is under God as the highest law, lex rex, and that every person within that government is under the human king, which in a republic is our Constitution. That's how it's set up. And it's this framework that is truly the holy experiment that was envisioned by William Penn himself and brought to fruition by the hands of so many people. But you see, while acknowledging these two biblical pillars of truth, which is critical, there's another essential element we must not overlook. And that essential component is the attitude of humility and the understanding that says, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. Now, whereas man has the choice of what type of government we will have, as God does not mandate in the Scripture what form of government a people are to have, there is no hope for freedom and success unless we align our motivations and our purposes with God's. What I mean by this is this: it's only when we learn God's definition of and His plan and purposes for government that we can hope to succeed in maintaining the republic which was built on these biblical principles. If our goal was strictly to make money or gain control over others, like most governments around the world, we will fail. If we hope to maintain the republic on the basis of human strategy or political conniving, we will fail. Remember, when the original Congress met in Philadelphia after the war was won, while they were deliberating this new Constitution and what it should look like, even this august group of men, when they were gathered in Philadelphia, were locked. They could not come to an agreement, and they were sequestered for weeks. And they could not come to an agreement. And it was the same Ben Franklin, who later told the woman, "We've given you a republic if you can keep it," stood to the floor as an old man and addressed the speaker and said, "Mr. Speaker, we've been gathered here for all of these weeks, and we've not been able to come to an agreement on the next step called a Constitution. We've argued and we've fought. We can't come to an agreement." Yet he said, "Isn't it interesting that when the war was going on, we met in this room every day to pray, to ask God to give us a victory that, humanly speaking, should have never happened. And we gather here today now to go to the next step of this new country, and do we think for a minute that we can do it on our own?" And that's when he walked in and said the phrase, "Mr. Speaker, I've lived a long time. And the longer I live, the more convinced I am that if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without God's notice, is it even possible to imagine that a nation can rise without His aid?" And upon that suggestion,